Welcome, everyone. We have a 45 minutes conversation today with Bobbye, Monica, and Darrin. And if you have any questions for them, feel free to type them down in the chat box. We'll be recording this for archive purpose and put it on Vimeo shortly. And we're also silence everyone just to ensure audio clarity in the background. Let's turn to Glenn Adamson.
Thank you, Lucy, and welcome to our three guests from across the country. We have Monica Obniski, formerly of the Milwaukee Art Museum, now heading over to Atlanta and the High Museum of Art. Hello, Monica.
Hey, Glenn.
Great to have you here. We have Darrin Alfred, who is at the Denver Art Museum, is coming to us from Denver.
Good morning.
Hey, and then we have Bobbye Tigerman from LACMA, the Los Angeles County Museum of Art, coming to us from the West Coast. Thanks for getting up early, Bobbye.
My pleasure. Hi, everybody.
We really appreciate it. So it's fantastic to have the three of you here together. And the game plan is that we're going to talk about two projects and two collaborations, both of which involve Monica. The first being Serious Play, and the second being Scandinavian Design and the United States. Before we plunge into that, just to repeat something Lucy said, which is important, please, as you listen, if you think of questions, just put them in the chat box, and we'll get back to them in the Q&A in the last 15 minutes of the broadcast. And also, if you wouldn't mind letting us know where you're coming in from. We already have 3 time zones represented. Let's see if we can get the 4th. So if you just tell us where you're coming in from, and that would be great. Just put that in the chat box. And with that, I'm actually going to turn it over to Monica to tell us about Serious Play in conjunction with Darrin. Thanks.
Great, thank you. So I'm just doing the sharings of the screen. Let's make sure this goes seamlessly. Okay, can everyone see my screen?
We can.
Mm-hmm, yeah.
Great. Oh my God. So we are going to first talk about Serious Play, and it is so hard to believe that this photograph was taken 1 year ago when we were in Denver opening Serious Play. I can't believe it.
I could use some whimsy in my life right now, to be honest.
I know. So I think what the game plan for me and Darrin is that we're going to use the installation shots from Milwaukee and from Denver to kind of to show people the exhibition. The show was staged in Milwaukee in the fall of 2018, and then in Denver in the spring of 2019. And we're just going to talk through some of the big ideas that we were trying to get across in the show, all the while highlighting this idea of curatorial collaboration, which is the whole point of why we're here today. And I think it's just important to point out one of the things that informed our curatorial direction, and that was the belief that play is a universal concept and that it should be available to everyone, right? Not just children, but to adults of all ages. And at its most fundamental level, this exhibition and its programming really sought to engender this idea that play is beneficial for our daily lives.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I might just add that the Charles Eames statement that, quote, toys are not really as innocent as they look, toys and games are the preludes to serious ideas, was, I think, a really useful way for us to frame this argument. We were very interested in the ways in which designers worked, or perhaps in this context, the way in which designers played, whether that was to problem solve, interrogate issues, or communicate ideas.
Yeah, so I'm just going to flip through a couple of slides from this first gallery, and this is the first gallery that looked at the American home. And in this first section, we were really interested in this notion of self-expression, that this idea of storage walls and decorating, basically all of the objects that we choose to surround ourselves with really means something. And, we understand that this isn't really a new idea. This is actually an old idea, but in the mid-century, this playful look was, a different approach. And I'm just scrolling through some really fun, highlights. But one highlight in this section that I want to point out was this integration of the Herman Miller Archive's newly acquired clock sketches by Irving Harper. And we were really thrilled when Amy Osherman, who's the archivist at the Herman Miller Archives, shared this recently acquired treasure trove with us. And she also very kindly wrote an essay about this aspect for our catalog. And it was also something that Darrin and I talked a lot about, and that was this idea of how do we show the process of design, right, Darrin?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think in addition to this idea of revealing the process whenever possible throughout the exhibition, it was also integral that we assemble an array of what we were calling sort of lesser known designers, those that might have been known to wider audiences in varying degrees, but that also sort of contributed to this dialogue in a really interesting way. And one of those designers was Chicago's Henry P. Glass. And in this image here, you see the installation of his swing line series of children's furniture, which was produced in this fun, bright colors, and it has these sort of unique hinged components that made it really easy for children to keep things tidy, and this idea of sort of color coding which drawer was for which objects.
Yeah, and I just love, Darrin, what you guys did with your exhibition design, because this is just a most exquisite installation too.
Thanks. Well, in addition to Henry Glass, a great discovery that I came across while I was researching Alcoa's forecast program was a series of DIY play projects that were proposed by the landscape architect Douglas Bayless and his wife and artist and writer Maggie Bayless. And in the early 1960s, the Baylesses envisioned, and here you see a series of drawings of these different backyard play structures that consumers could easily build from plywood. And in fact, eventually my assistant at Denver at the time was able to track down the specifications for the tri-tower that you see on the left of the slide. And basically, people could sort of send a nickel to the American Plywood Association and they would mail out the specifications. And so we were able to construct one of those to really sort of bring these play projects to life in the gallery.
Yeah, so along those same lines, in terms of like highlighting lesser known designers, but then also replicating the things that they were making, we were also trying to highlight as many women as possible as well. And so I think I really loved our focus on Ann Ting. And as many of you may know, her first project out of architecture school was like not a building, but in fact it was this Ting toy. And it was really great because, we went to do research at the University of Pennsylvania's Architectural Archive, did a whole lot of digging there, and also realized that they had the drawings for this. And what I'm showing you here is the this participatory space that we created in Milwaukee. And so the blueprints are actually the carpet on which kids and adults could build these Ting toys. And what I loved when I came into the galleries, in the mornings, just to kind of look in on the exhibition before we tidied it up again, for the rest of the day. What I loved was coming into the space, and it was nice when people made like the table and the rocking horse, the prescribed versions that Anne actually dictated as part of her Ting toy. But the best part was when people used their own imagination and created toys or other structures that were not these things. So they really kind of took the took the call of the exhibition into their own hands. So that was, I think, a really successful part of the exhibition. And I think that particular project with Ann Ting, but then also Charles and Ray Eames, really highlight some of the things that we were interested in, which was looking at these designers that really intertwined work and play. And these are two examples of designers that did that. And of course, since we did a mid-century show, that Charles and Ray Eames figured very heavily in this. And I loved that we were able to show their wide-ranging practice, film, toys, furniture. But I think the most exciting part for me, and I don't know if you'll agree, Darrin, but was the ability to be able to borrow from the Eames archive and to actually see the things that they lived with on their, in their daily life, and that formed part of their artistic practice.
I would absolutely agree. And actually we had great opportunity. Carla Hartman, who is one of the grandchildren of Ray and Charles Eames, lives here in Denver and was really able to sort of facilitate what was a very immersive West Coast Eames experience for us that we really enjoyed. And here you see where we're projecting their film Tops in Denver, alongside a variety of vintage tops from the Eames archive that I think really sort of enriched the experience of the film for visitors. And that, combined with the opportunity to actually play with tops as one watched the film, made it one of the popular hands-on experiences in the exhibition in Denver, and with all ages. I was amazed. Anytime I would walk through the exhibition, you would see little children and sort of older adults sort of gathered around this table watching the film and sort of playing with the toys.
Yeah, so I'm just going to zoom us through some other shots. Yeah, these participatory spaces that we had in both cities were wildly popular. And these are just cute shots of kids in Denver, which is really fun. And I'll just, just a shout out to some of the lenders who were incredibly generous, and allowed us to build with these vintage Eames toys, right? So that we could actually create, the tower, the pup tent, the plane, these other things that make registrars' heads spin. But when you have lenders who are very generous, then you can actually make these things come to life, which is super important, I think. And now we're just kind of zooming into the third section of the exhibition, which looked at corporate approaches. And Darrin and I actually originally bonded over our love of Alexander Gerard. And, I think for anyone that knows me, and you would know that I now can't do a show without including my dissertation boyfriend. And in fact, Bobbye even allowed Alexander Gerard to be snuck into Scandinavian Design. But I thought our recreation of the textiles and objects shop was quite successful. I mean, I think, number one, visually, it borrowed from the tenets of that Herman Miller shop, which was great. But it also really clearly communicated the point of the store, but then also the point of this section, which was that some companies like Herman Miller in the post-war really embraced playfulness and whimsy in their corporate approaches.
Yeah, and I think one of those companies was Alcoa, the Aluminum Company of America, which was based in Pittsburgh, my hometown. So it was really exciting to be able to have the opportunity to dive into this design program, which began in 1956 and enlisted more than some 20 designers over a 4-year period. And the idea was that they would create these visually captivating prototypes that utilize aluminum in new and forward-thinking ways. And the designers were asked not to provide a product to manufacture necessarily, but more of an intriguing concept that would inspire original thinking by other designers. And so we exhibited not only some of those prototypes, but also the advertisements that were used in magazines from that time, like Life and Newsweek and others. And in this installation shot, you see the striking forecast rug by Marion Stringle, Cranbrook, a prototype for Jay Doblin's People Chair. And one of my favorite pieces in this section was the maquette for Henry Glass's accordion camp trailer, which was this actual almost function kind of like a toy for this sort of kind of fold out and expand kind of trailer that you could hitch on the back of your truck or car.
Yeah, that was one of that and the Jay Doblin chair were two of the kind of greatest treasures, I think, in terms of, things that we unearthed in this exhibition, which was great fun. Just continuing on, the other kind of corporate spaces, we recreated Braniff, which Gerard did in the 60s as he redesigned the corporate identity of Braniff Airlines. Some graphic designers like Paul Rand, who, wrote eloquently about play. And then in Milwaukee, the exit to the gift shop was an evocation of Barton's Bonbonniere, where we enticed people with copies of the Serious Play catalog before they exited. But I really love what Denver did at the end of their exhibition.
Yeah, this participatory aspect was central to both Monica and I's vision. And in Denver, thanks to the support of Herman Miller Cares, we developed what we called the sort of free play zone. It was sort of a rather generous space at the end of the exhibition that allowed us to sort of shift the tone in the way that visitors engaged and invite visitors of all ages to sort of climb, relax, explore their own creativity within this zone. And so we had 3 sort of stations or invitations to play, including the Ting Toy, like they had in Milwaukee, where visitors could build one of the designs or imagine and construct their own. This is the space where we installed Osamu Noguchi's play sculptures for visitors to crawl around and climb on. Also, we were really interested in Denver in this way that many mid-century designers enjoyed making and playing with masks. And so we created these sort of Eames-inspired masks that were designing, made by a Denver-based textile artist. Bree Angela Thompson, for visitors to sort of transform themselves in this space. And here you see a bunch of DAM staff utilizing these masks in the opening. I should also mention too that Denver's exhibition team worked really closely with Studio Joseph in New York on the design of not only the exhibition, but of these sort of interactive spaces and components, so that they all sort of read the same and felt sort of part of one another. There was not sort of this idea of sort of separating the interactives and those experiences from sort of the art viewing experiences that we had.
Yeah, and we of course did things a little differently because Milwaukee was a different city, but this participatory aspect that we talk about that was central to the vision, of course, was manifested differently in Milwaukee. And one of the things that we did was that I worked with the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee School of Architecture and Urban Planning. And on the left here, you see Moselle, who's the chair of architecture. You see her talking to the Milwaukee Art Museum's Teen Council. So Mo did this wonderful thing after talking with me about this exhibition. She ran an architecture course on the mid-century prefabrication, architect design toys. And out of that course came many, many projects that these architecture students came up with. And alongside the Milwaukee Art Museum's Teen Council, we judged the projects that came out of that course, selected the best ones. Those then came to the museum and were seen in the education gallery during the run of the exhibition, which was a really nice kind of partnership that we did. And then, just in thinking about this broader community engagement, which is what we're all trying to do these days, we also ran a community art-driven experience in Milwaukee that was made possible by the generosity of Herman Miller Cares, who sponsored this particular program, which allowed us to send 10,000 of these house of cards out into the community. They were then gathered, and the very marvelous Ray Chi, who you see here on the left, alongside his 3 students, came up with, he actually built his design, which on the left you see the spiral that was seen in the Calatrava Windover Hall during the run of the exhibition. And on the right you see a segment of the East End where we held 4 community build days during the run of the exhibition. So anyone, and this was in a free space in the museum, so anyone could come to this space and build with Ray during those 4 Sundays and 1 Thursday. And this was really nice because it was a kind of evolving installation over the course of the exhibition. So it was, great for those that came back to see the show multiple times.
Yeah, in Denver too, we sort of engaged the educational community by creating this digital interactive touchscreen that was at the end of the American Home section. And it gave visitors the opportunity to sort of choose and arrange their own mid-century inspired interior. It was designed and created by Professor Brian Leister and his students from the College of Arts and Media at the University of Colorado, Denver.
And this is our ending slide, which is what the noodle looked like in Milwaukee.
Well, thanks very much, both. It's fantastic to see that you realize one potential of the subject, which is to get people interacting with the object. So getting to crawl all over a Noguchi, whether you're in Denver or Milwaukee. So the spirit of the exhibition comes across really strongly, even in these images. And I have to say, it's just so fantastic to be able to see a show that I wasn't able to see in person and get your kind of virtual walkthrough across time and space. So it's really amazing to have that opportunity. I think we'll just carry right along and now turn to project number 2, Scandinavian Design in the United States. So Monica, this is now a project that you collaborated on with Bobbye Tigerman.
Yeah, so I mean, dry my tears, but our show Scandinavian Design in the United States was supposed to open today. And Glenn, thank you for the invitation to talk about this on this day, which I thought was really quite brilliant. But we were supposed to open today in Milwaukee, but of course, due to the coronavirus, the US venues have been postponed to 2022, 23. And it looks like the show will now open in Stockholm in September of 2021, so mark your calendars. But as a tribute to the As Yet to Be Seen exhibition, Bobbye and I are going to take you on a short journey of the making of this show.
Yeah, thanks, Monica. So this show has been many years in the making, and it's really about many different dimensions of exchange between the United States and Scandinavia in the realm of design. So I'm just going to run through a couple of different kinds of things you will see in the show in a couple of years. One is a big piece of the show is immigrant Scandinavian designers who settled in the United States and shaped American design culture. So here we have Eliel Saarinen's Cranbrook map. He came and settled in Detroit, near Detroit, in the 20s and built this school that really shaped American design. We also include Americans who studied or taught in the Nordic countries. So here's Arlene Fish, who had 2 Fulbrights to Denmark that really shaped the course of her work. We look at design as a diplomatic tool. So here's Mariana Richter's drawing for this gorgeous curtain that hung in the United Nations, one of the United Nations chambers. We also look at the extensive campaigns to market and export Scandinavian design to the US. So here's this really essential Dansk ad. Dansk, of course, being an American company, but that was little known. And then lastly, the ways that design was used as an impetus for social change, for environmental sustainability, for universal access, and how it kind of continues to be relevant today.
Yeah, so I think beyond the design history contribution, and that is that American design has largely been a story that emphasizes the contributions of 1930s immigrants from Central Europe, namely within the context of the Bauhaus and its descendants. Instead, what we want to do is advocate for this multi-generational influence of Scandinavian design in the United States. And Bobbye and I feel that there are 3 main themes that guide this exhibition and which remain utterly relevant today, even though this is a historical design exhibition. The first of those is the valuable contribution that immigrant artists, designers, and craftspeople have made to their adopted societies. The second is the importance of critically analyzing advertisements and marketing to understand their latent meanings. This is incredibly important in our world today, as we all know. And the third is this impulse to address environmental sustainability and accessibility, which, you know, it just still is mind-blowing that 50 years ago, we were talking about the very same topics that we are talking about today, and yet very little has changed.
So this all began in 2005 when Monica and I were lowly research assistants in the American wing at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. And we got to know each other really well because we shared an office that had formerly been a supply closet. And if Monica wanted to leave the office, I had to like tuck my chair in under my desk. So we were there for a short while, and then we both left New York. Monica went to the Art Institute of Chicago. I went to LACMA. We got involved in various projects. I was working on, for many years, a show about mid-century California design that opened in 2011. And in the course of researching that show, I began to notice a lot of connections to the Nordic countries, whether it was immigrants who settled here and you know, had very successful careers, or just sort of the general pervasiveness of Scandinavian aesthetics and ethos. And I thought that this might be a bigger story, it might be a national story. So I started to collect material. And in 2014, I organized a session at the College Art Association, which is the big annual art history conference in the country. And
yeah, so this was 2014, and I was flipping through that conference call for papers at my desk at the Art Institute, and I lost my mind. I immediately put the thing down, picked up the phone, called Bobbye, and I remember distinctly saying, "Bobbye, get out of my head, because I've been thinking about this topic too." And so we chatted for a little bit, and you know, started talking about how we could work on this project together. And so for me, part of the reason that I was interested in this material, beyond the Art Institute's rich holdings, of course, some of which eventually became part of our touring checklist, was because I had taken a class at the Bard Graduate Center on Swedish modern design with one professor, Helena Kobeg, who actually ended up being one of our collaborators. And so we talked and thought about the show over the course of, the next 2 years. But I'd say the project really began in earnest when we received initial funding from the Terra Foundation for American Art. Thank you to Terra. And in 2016, we were able to travel to Canada, Sweden, and Norway. And then we began talking with Helena, who had left New York many years before, and at that point was a senior, and still is, a senior curator at the National Museum in Stockholm. And it was Helena who also then put us in touch with her friend and colleague, Denise Hegströmer, who is a senior curator at the Nationalmuseet in Oslo. And the project really took off then. Now that everyone, of course, is doing Zoom and has included Zoom in their life, this slide might not seem like a novelty, but we were doing video conferencing years before it was Corona cool. So you can see the four of us here. You can also see us a little bit better here. We continued the collaboration with Helena and Denise, visiting them several times over the years. I feel we were extremely fortunate to have had the opportunity to visit the Nordic countries so many times. And here we are doing a hard hat tour of the Nationalmuseet in Oslo. And this is the building that will host the exhibition in 22.
And so the research took many different shapes. A really important piece of it was we were able to host a scholarly convening in LA in 2018. Also, thank you, Terra Foundation. We couldn't have done it without you. And we brought 6 scholars of Nordic design to talk about the show. Monica and I had already done a preliminary checklist and a basic outline of the show, and we gave it to them and said, critique, make it better. And they really helped us refine the ideas. And many of them also were writers for the catalog too.
Yeah, this was the classic build or break us down before they build us up again. It was an intense few days.
Yeah. And so we also are super grateful to dozens of curators, collection managers, registrars, all the people who allowed us access to objects, opened their storerooms for us. This is me at the Goldstein Museum in Minnesota, looking at a lovely Rhea rug. And then we really, that collegiality, we could not have done this project without them.
Yeah, because, as Bobbye and I were talking about yesterday, we saw, I mean, thousands is too much, but we saw hundreds of objects over the course of these last 5 years. And of course, not all of them can make it into the exhibition.
Yeah. And then archives was another big piece of the show. Many very, very kind archivists helped us along the way. And here we are, we're at the Cranbrook Archives. Cranbrook, as I mentioned before, near Detroit, is a fulcrum around which much of the show revolves. And we have all of the Saarinen, Eliel, Loya, Arrow, and Pipson all appear in the show. And so here we are discovering something wonderful about the Saarinens.
Or just laughing. So I think one of the best parts about curatorial collaboration is this divide and conquer strategy. Of course, when possible, and as Bobbye would like to say, mission critical, we did travel together, but there were occasions when it made sense for us to, divide. And so, Bobbye, for example, took on California, and I ended up doing quite a bit of the Midwest traveling. Although Bobbye and I did go to Minneapolis and Chicago together. I made it out to some other Midwestern hot spots. On the left here, this is in Vesterheim, Iowa, the Norwegian American Museum, and Vesterheim is a wonderful lender to our exhibition. And then on the right is a slide from Stoughton, but Hannah Paivo, who was our curatorial assistant in Milwaukee for many years on this project, she and I took a road trip to central Wisconsin, which included first Mount Horeb, Wisconsin, which was the former site of Little Norway. So this is the pavilion from the 1893 World's Fair that started in Chicago and then moved to Lake Geneva, Wisconsin, and then moved to Mount Horeb, Wisconsin, before it was actually repatriated back to Norway a few years ago. And if you're interested in that story and other World's Fair architecture, Charlotte Ashby wrote a wonderful essay on that in the catalog. But that town, which today is called Trolltown, USA, was our first stop. And then we also went to Stoughton, where arguably the Renaissance for rose mailing originated. And you know, we didn't just travel in the US, of course. Traveling happened in Sweden and other Scandinavian countries. But I think another rewarding aspect of putting together this exhibition was the ability to talk to so many designers who had a hand in this Nordic exchange. And so you see Bobbye and I here with Bjorn Jakobsen, who's the founder alongside his wife Lillemor of Baby Bjorn. And so when we visited Artipelag, we heard from Bjorn about his travels to the United States during the post-war to really understand industry, as well as his formative experience learning about Cleveland, the Cleveland doctor's research into attachment parenting, which greatly informed the product that we all know today as the Baby Bjorn. And of course, Alexandra Lang wonderfully writes about this in the catalog, and I know that Glenn is having Alexandra next week, so that'll be fun. And then, of course, we had a little bit of fun throughout this entire process as well, all in the name of research, of course. But we wanted to include a Volvo in the exhibition. And the Amazon 122S made the most sense for our project because it was the first model sold in the US in which Volvo's 3-point seatbelt was offered. So right, this was this kind of introduction of safety to the United States. So Bobbye and I, when we were in New York one time, drove out to New Jersey to inspect this beauty. And for those that are interested, and that watch Jerry Seinfeld's Comedians in Cars Getting Coffee, this car was in the episode with Kristen Wiig. So when the nice people at Volvo Cars USA offered us the chance to test drive the car that was going to be in the exhibition, well, Bobbye and I jumped at the opportunity to drive 5 miles an hour around that parking lot. That's as fast as we went.
Thanks, Monica. So we really left no stone unturned for this project, including a visit to the IKEA Museum in Älmhult, Sweden, south of Sweden. And IKEA actually didn't make it into the show at the end of the day, but we did get to take a picture of ourselves on the cover of that year's IKEA catalog. So, opportunity.
And one of my favorite photos, too.
Yeah. The show is postponed, but the book is out. We edited this volume that included 18 contributors, including Glenn, of course, who wrote 31 different essays about all different aspects of the show. And there's some really fascinating research in here about Norwegian American rose milling and the Viking revival or dragon style in the United States. Hi, Graham. Or Roseanne Summerson, the president of RISD, wrote about her seminal experiences in Denmark. And then, of course, there is the not well-known connection between John F. Kennedy and troll dolls, written by LACMA's research assistant, Danielle Charlap. So even though the show is delayed, you can read the book. You can buy it at LACMA and MAM's web shop and many other places online. And it's a good summary of what we've been doing.
Okay, great. Thanks, guys. That was fantastic to see, particularly all those behind the scenes shots. You guys make curating look like an enviable vocation. Looks like you had an absolute blast doing this. I am gonna, despite our subjects, which have to do with play and the delights of Scandinavian design, I'm going to try to ask some extremely serious questions now. My first of which, and really this is addressed to all three of you, is about how one conducts research in a collaborative mode, because I think a lot of people maybe assume that research is a hard thing to share, because you plunge into an archive, you find things, you sort of follow your nose, and it takes you where it takes you, and it's often framed as a very personal journey, almost like a kind of heroic quest into the depths of history. And I wonder how you went about dividing up the intellectual labor of the exhibitions.
I mean, I think Scandinavia is the freshest for me right now. So I'll just say the Google Drive is amazing. We share everything, and on trips that we take together, we share, all of the images that we've taken, notes that we've taken. Everything is available for both sets of eyes, and actually not just both sets of eyes, for curatorial assistance as well, because everyone is part of the dialogue. And then on trips that we took alone to different archives, again, all of that information is then uploaded. And I honestly don't know how we could have done this project without some sort of cloud sharing experience. I think we would have had to have more phone calls. I don't know how you feel about that, Bobbye.
Yeah, I mean, I've described co-curating a show like this to getting married, and you really have to love your partner and love their flaws too, and be very open about communication. It's not something that I would sort of embark upon with someone I don't know very well. And it was sort of organic the way that the research unfolded. As Monica described, there were things that made more sense for her to do because they were easier geographically or for whatever reason. But it was,
Midwestern hotspots.
We did have calls.
Right. And what about you, Darrin? How did you think about the intellectual sort of job share situation?
Monica was really my work wife for a very long time. And I think unlike Bobbye, Monica and I had maybe only a few sort of interactions with one another, but I think right off the bat, there was this connection and this interest in doing something around Girard. And it just kind of developed from there. And I think I'm very lucky that that relationship turned out to be as sort of collaborative and enjoying and rewarding as it has been. Monica also sort of opened my eyes to the cloud sharing thing. And again, this sort of Google Docs and spreadsheets and all those sorts of things was a way for us to be able to visually and intellectually share information that we were gathering separately or together, and a very sort of a kind of open, no ego kind of conversation where there were just ideas thrown out on the table. Sometimes we agreed, sometimes we didn't, and it just really sort of worked itself out, and I think in a very intuitive and natural way.
I'm really interested in the fact that, in fact, the first thing you said, Monica, was Google Docs is kind of one of the main answers. And I'm very interested in the idea that contemporary digital communication technology of the kind that we're currently engaging in here on Zoom, that this is enabling a kind of new era of curatorial collaboration that might have been quite difficult in the age of typewritten letters, which I think is just interesting to notice. And I wonder whether you also think that maybe even given the current pandemic circumstances, that this kind of curatorial collaboration will become more and more common and indeed more urgent because of the resource sharing and the efficiency that it brings about. I mean, did you actually find it more efficient, or what do you think about that?
I mean, for me, it was very strategic. Being in Milwaukee, I knew that if I wanted to do larger projects, I needed to have partners. So from a resource sharing perspective, that was, it wasn't anything that anyone told me, but it was something that I just knew that if I wanted to do something ambitious, that I needed to have someone kind of, sharing it with me. And I'll say, I guess I'll just say that I think moving forward, what I've discovered is that I actually really love it. I really love the collaborative process. I love, Darrin mentioned being open. I think this, we talk about being, everything being transparent, right? I mean, I think that adjective has been overused, and in fact, sometimes doesn't mean transparency. But in this kind of setup, it's actually really required. And if you aren't kind of open to these possibilities, you can't undertake a project like this. So, to answer your question, I guess I do think that in a future world, I don't know, maybe 10 years from now, we'd be able to undertake something like Scandinavia again, but I don't know that it would be, it'd be feasible right now, honestly.
Yeah, that's a really important point, because in some ways, the experience that you have just had, especially you and Bobbye with all that travel, that just seems like a distant world already, even though it's very recent that you did it. So it's just good to remember that. Can I ask you a kind of disciplinary question about design and collaborative curation and design as opposed to fine art? And I want to ask you, Darrin, this question first, because you had framed the collaborative research process that you and Monica undertook as kind of an additive thing. So you started with Gerard and you kind of worked out from there, and it was a lot of discoveries, and you're kind of doing a mapping service. Mm-hmm. And it strikes me that, this isn't an absolute distinction between what design curators and what fine art curators do, but it does seem to me like curators do an awful lot of finding stuff that nobody's even heard of and organizing these big kind of macroscopic accounts of very widely distributed products and companies and individuals who are active within a certain theme or a certain strand of design. And I wonder whether you think that the kind of division of curatorial interests actually suits design more because of the nature of what design curators are actually thinking about, like those corporate archives, for example.
I certainly think that in many ways it allows us to be much more flexible. I also think, Monica and I had this conversation the other day about sort of presenting the work of a particular mid-century artist / designer. And I think that for a design curator to look at that body of work, we're looking at it much more holistically. In other words, we're not siloing the artistic practice from the design practice, but I think sort of colleagues in sort of the sort of fine art realm might think of the design silo in their mind as something lesser than. So I think just by nature, we're very sort of open-minded and looking for anything that can sort of help represent this work in a way, whether it's the actual work, prototypes, advertising as it was in Serious Play in Alcoa. But I think our minds are sort of less siloed and much more open to sort of different ideas and ways of approaching these exhibitions.
Yeah, I mean, said another way, it's non-hierarchical. I mean, the fact that we are comfortable showing advertisements alongside, an object is like, we don't see the distinctions. And I think that's what Darrin's getting across here.
So it's partly the miscellany of the kinds of material that you're going to be showing and indeed are using in the research path as well. I remember when I did an industrial design exhibition in Milwaukee Art Museum back in my earlier days, I remember using eBay as an early research tool, for example, which is certainly not something my fine art colleagues were doing at the time. Bobbye, I know LACMA, I think this is the imprint of Wendy Kaplan's curatorial personality as well, and she deserves a mention here. But I know LACMA has done quite a lot of exhibitions that are about establishing a field of knowledge where there was previously very much a kind of disconnected, maybe, word of mouth, but very little sort of reliable information. So the California Design Project that you did, or Found in Translation, which was about California in relation to Mexico. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the LACMA program in light of these questions about sort of establishing coherent narratives.
Right, so it is certainly a model that Wendy has developed, and I think it's very common in not just design, but the decorative arts field, which is where a lot of us come out of. These sort of sprawling multimedia shows that are taking into account a large period of time or place. And I've thought a lot about, shall I do a monographic show next? What are the series of choices that you make? Because you can only do so many shows, and the resources are scarce. And I think for me, part of my mission, my personal mission, is to kind of show how the museum model and the way we think about artists as singular geniuses doesn't really reflect, certainly in design, how design works. Design is by definition a collaborative process because you always have a designer and a client. And so by reinforcing these monographic shows, you are reinforcing this idea. And by doing shows that are broader, you can have a more nuanced sort of perspective on how design works and how things are made. And so for me, those broader shows appeal more because they allow you to tell more stories.
And stories also about lots of different kinds of people simultaneously, because in fact, it wouldn't just be, let's say, the designer and the client, but also the client would be lots of people. You know, you'd have marketing people.
And the designer is not just a singular entity. There are many people that are coming together to make whatever product it is, but often only one name gets put on the label.
Yeah. And that seems like a really important impetus in recent design curation and research more generally, is trying to map those authorship structures of the different people who were involved, who actually were exerting decision-making agency in the process of making these products a reality. So it's a difficult job in a lot of ways, the design research that you all are doing, but it really pays off in the richness of these exhibitions and their accompanying publications, that's for sure. I think we should now turn to questions if we can. We have quite a few. I feel like this is, of all the talks that we've had, well, for one thing, it's actually the most attended talk that we've had on the series so far, over 175 people a few minutes ago, which is great to see. And we have a lot of curators and other museum professionals in the audience. And I thought we could first turn to Graham Butcher, who's coming to us from the Birmingham Museum of Art and is a lender to the Scandinavian Design Show, I know, and a contributor to the catalog, and also an old friend of mine because we went to grad school together. Right. Graham, how are you doing? Oh, we heard you for a second and aren't hearing you anymore. Are you still there?
Mute.
There we go. Hey,
there we go. I was just going back to the beginning of the talk. I was wondering if Gloria Karanica was included in the exhibition. I'm very interested in artists, particularly women artists and designers that I consider as underknown, and I think she is definitely qualifies. Her work is in several museum collections, but she has not become a household name.
Yes, she was included in Serious Play in the Child's Play section. In fact, a local collector here in Denver lent us the hobby rocking horse that we featured. I have a particular passion in plywood design, so it was really great to be able to utilize that particular object in the show.
Awesome. Well, I just ordered the catalog while we were on this call. It should be here Monday from Amazon, so I look forward to reading it.
Awesome.
Fantastic. Everyone else should do likewise, of course. Can we go to Jennifer Olivarez from the Minneapolis Institute of Art? Hi, Jennifer. Thanks for tuning in.
Hi.
Hey, Jennifer. Good to see you.
So nice to see you guys. I work a lot with all of our exhibitions now. So my question was really about like looking at all the participatory aspects of the show, on children's design. It kind of makes my, hair stand up now. And, just wondered how you are thinking about exhibition design in that going forward without perhaps having a hands-on experience, and did that come into play with the Scandinavian Design Show at all?
Thanks, Jennifer. Hey, so actually, Darrin and I were just talking about this. We don't think that the participatory spaces as we had conceived them for Serious Play would obviously fly today. So this is something that I think all of us are going to need to think about in American art museums as we move toward what we're calling these immersive experiences, because we understand that museum visitors really want these in some of their exhibitions. So how do we create them safely? I don't have an answer for that, but I know that at least at the High, we are actively thinking about this because it is a place where that is something that is part of the DNA of the institution. For Scandi, we don't really have any, we talked early on about whether we would, incorporate some of these kind of experiences. We thought about the Danish compan, for example. But in the end, we actually had too many objects in the show. So we needed all of the square footage for actual, art exhibition as opposed to participatory experiences. So, yeah, but I think Los Angeles, Bobbye, weren't you guys were going to do something outdoors, right?
Right. And I think that, now we have a little bit of time to think through what's possible now. Because you're right, everything has changed. But we have a couple of years to think, and maybe there'll be a vaccine by then.
Yeah.
Yeah. Power is willing. It's amazing to think about how an exhibition would also change in your own mind over such a long period of time, because of course any exhibition, even a historical one, will inevitably have to transform. So that'll be fascinating for you guys to see it through. Heidi Hankanemi has a really interesting question about finish design. I'd love to get her on.
Oh my God, you're not going to go on?
No.
Okay.
No.
Too shy, please just answer my question.
Too shy.
Heidi, should I just read the question out for you? It's just a quick question. Too shy. Okay, so it's just a quick question about finish design, apart from the Saarinen, obviously, who you listed out. And she says the Kennedys and Jackie particularly wore Marimekko. And looked great in it, I'm sure. And something about your shirt, Monica.
Yes. I'll just do this a little bit. Very perceptive, Heidi. So I'll just say, in terms of finished design, actually we did borrow, we are having Jackie Kennedy's Marimekko dresses that we borrowed from the Design Museum Helsinki. Thank you, Design Museum Helsinki. Bobbye and I we wanted all of the all of the Nordic countries to be represented. We even have work from Iceland, for example. So we wanted there to be some bit of parity. So there is a fair amount of finished design in the exhibition, although, obviously we didn't talk about nearly enough of the actual design that's in the exhibition. And you are very perceptive. This is a Joka Poika shirt that I'm wearing in a new colorway. Marimekko sent out an email and they were having a sale, and I just couldn't resist.
Yeah, it's an occupational hazard, right? Okay, thanks. We have sort of similar questions from Julie Simpson and Mel Buchanan. Julie, do you want to go first? And then Mel, who's from the New Orleans Museum of Art, can also ask her question. But Julie, do you want to chime in first?
Sure. Hi.
Hey there.
Can you see? I was just, your exhibitions have now been moved back so far. So I'm sure you have other processes going on new shows, and just how are you thinking about those for the future? Because you don't know if you'll ever be able to do them in person, and you can't go out and touch objects and visit archives and all of that. So I know this is a hard question.
As you know, these shows take a very long time. So it actually gives us the proper amount of time. What was nice about Scandinavia, and I hope will happen again in my career, but I don't know, is that we had the proper amount of time to do the research. It was not rushed, and as a result, we get a better product. So I think that in the next couple of years, things will be very different, and our schedule certainly has been pushed so that there aren't as many gaps. But in the long run, I think that we will continue to be doing exhibitions with loans, and there still will be a place for a in-person museum experience. Though I think what has become clear to all of us is how important it is to augment that with other kinds of experiences for people who can't make it to the museum, either because financial reasons or health reasons or whatever reason, geographic reasons, and placing a really high priority on other kinds of content that can reach further than the walls of the museum.
Yeah, I'll just make a plug. And Bobbye and I were talking about this very thing yesterday. The Canadian Centre for Architecture came up with a book last year called The Museum is Not Enough. And the premise of this book is you got to go beyond the walls, because not everyone comes to your institution. And if you have a powerful message, and of course the CCA, believes that architecture is intrinsic to everyone's daily life, and they're right. So how do you actually do that? And you do that through a digital platform. And so, I think museums are now scrambling because we've been forced to recognize that, and other institutions that have taken a kind of long view are better positioned to be able to do that.
I think Mel Buchanan, who in fact was your predecessor in Milwaukee, of course, Monica, and now is at the New Orleans Museum, had a kind of similar question. Mel, do you want to join into that part of the conversation?
Yes, hi. Yeah, I think this is a great topic. It's what we've been thinking about at NOMA. To kind of take it a step further, we're thinking we're not going to have the number of people in our galleries for, even in an optimistic view, a couple of years. So we're looking at online, and then we look at statistics here in New Orleans. The percentage of households here in New Orleans that don't have internet access is really shockingly low. So I'm just trying to go around in my head, if these are things we're all thinking of right now, it's like we're being doubly hindered about accessibility to the projects that we're trying to connect with communities. So I'm just selfishly, I'm looking for ideas for myself of how we can work forward at NOMA. Just wondering if there were any brilliant ideas from this group about, how we move forward without people in the galleries, catalogs that are expensive, and online, I guess, is the way to go, but not looking at that as 100% accessible to everyone. Yeah, I don't know if that's a comment or a question, but that's what I'm rolling with in my brain over here right now. Thank you.
That's a really great point, though, that we can persuade ourselves that getting online is an instant accessibility tool, but obviously it only goes so far, even if it does represent an advance of access over the sort of bricks and mortar museum and obviously the publication programs. Monica, Darrin, Bobbye, any thoughts about that?
Darrin, you might want to field this because I know you've been thinking about this.
Well, I think we're all sort of grappling with this question right now, and time will only tell how we'll deal with it. But one thing that we have been doing in Denver prior to this was sort of bringing the museum to the community. In other words, finding ways to create sort of art exhibitions, whether they were utilizing the collection or objects sort of inspired by or related to the collection, out to the community, whether that was in schools or sort of, older nursing care homes, those sorts of things, as a way to, again, sort of move outside the walls of the institution. And again, sort of understanding as well that the digital platform can only go so far and reach only certain audiences. So that's one thing we've done in the past. Now, whether that program will continue in the future or how it might change is to be seen, so.
Okay, thanks. We have one last question, which is really kind of an extension of the same thought process from Marian Engelbach, who has a question about VR. Marian, can you join us by video? Yes, hi, how are you?
Okay. Hi, everyone. Thank you for this series. It really makes this time go much better.
Great.
Yeah, I'm a trained architect, and I've worked into the 3D virtual world, mostly for movies and commercial, working on. So I'm just thinking about VR, which is, I've seen it in museums, and I'm not in this world anymore, but I wonder how this could be used from home. I have actually no idea how it would, but with all video games and everything. So, it's not the same. You can't touch, you can't really see as well the texture of everything, but I don't know. This might be pushing the development of these techniques to experience a space or a 3D environment somewhere else.
So I know that there have been sort of 360 tours popping up, like the Met has one of the Temple of Dendur, I know, and Shelley Selim from Indianapolis, Newfields, has just mentioned that there's a virtual tour of the Miller House and Garden that will soon be popping up on YouTube. What do you guys think about this sort of virtualization of the museum and historic environments?
So I'll just say for myself, having seen some VR experiences, I think they're nice right now. Some are better than others, but for me, I think that they're an enhancement. I don't think that they're a replacement. You know, I'm old school and believe in the power of the object and the primacy of the thing, and so, you know, if we say that VR is going to be the future, then why come to an art museum in the first place? So I think that they can work hand in hand to enhance, but, you know, I might just be old school.
I wonder if it's going to become sort of like listening to an album as opposed to seeing a live band or something, like both good but in totally different ways.
Yeah, and with the sort of explosion of content now in the last couple of weeks, I find that it's more successful for me when I see, a curator or someone with knowledge talking about an object and then seeing images of that object, as opposed to seeing the physical space necessarily, at least with the technology we have today. I find it more valuable and rewarding to get sort of a deeper view than have me kind of jump from point to point and not really be able to see the object or the interpretive label that goes with it.
Well, I think we've just come to time, and I think we might have to leave it there. We've got some other very interesting comments, for example, from Rachel Dalthia from the Carnegie, talking about the priorities changing now that on-site access is closed. And it does prompt the thought that maybe the pandemic itself is going to provide a tremendous acceleration of the technologies that do connect us. Zoom is great, but I have a feeling Zoom won't be the answer forever, and that these kinds of interactive methods that we're using are going to change very, very fast. And probably the longer the pandemic has an effect in our lives, the greater the acceleration will be, and we'll have to see what happens. And fortunately, design curators in the future will be there to tell us how it all went down. So meanwhile, thanks so much for your comments and conversation and interaction. I think we've not only gotten a great sense of those two shows, and again, so sad that we can't all be in Milwaukee at the opening tonight for the Scandinavian Design Show, but this kind of virtual access that you've given us anyway has been fantastic. And it's also just shown how I think the kind of friendliness and mutual support and sharing and transparency that you all have shown together has been a big part of why those projects have been so successful. So great job, everyone. Just a quick plug for our next couple of sessions. On Monday, we have the absolutely amazing Los Angeles-based ceramic artist, Adam Silverman. So staying at least a little bit in LA there, Bobbye, who's going to be talking about his pots and also his installations thereof and current projects. And then on Wednesday, we have the aforementioned divinely inspired architectural critic, Alexander Lang, one of my heroes, and a contributor to the Scandinavian Design catalog. So
and Serious Play.
And Serious Play as well, that's right. So yeah, she's everywhere, including on Design and Dialogue on Wednesday. So please come back next week. And that's it for today. Thanks so much for your participation. It's been great to have you here on the program.
Thank you.
Thanks, Glenn, and everyone.
Okay, thanks everyone for listening.